Hello and welcome to KennyRoy.com. I'm Kenny Roy. This is the Ask Videomail for the week of July 16th, 2012. Welcome to the site to all you new members and welcome back to the old. The Ask Videomail is your chance to get your question in character animation or performance answered in a video just like this one, but I need your question if I'm going to answer it. So please send your questions to webmaster@kennyroy.com. It's a great way to get the most out of your subscription. I answer the questions I think will help the most people, and it is simple and easy. Do it today if you haven't already. I got to figure out where I'm going to put the microphone wire now that I have this big honking computer in the way, because it's just going to be clicking all day here. Forgive me. Showing you a little process mark here. All right, let me just clip it on right here. So let's see. In terms of news this week, I know I've been teasing you guys with a supposedly big announcement that's been coming, that is still coming. We are going to be opening up the applications for the little painter very soon. There we go, clipped, beautiful, out of the way. Very soon, and you can just send in your materials if you want to be considered as a contributor to the project. Sounds fun, right? Also, there is going to be the webcast replay pages added to KennyRoy.com. So if you log in and you go to webcasts, any of the webcasts that are past are going to have the, I think there's just a message there right now that says, "Thank you for watching, check back for the replay," or something like that. It'll just be replaced with a replay. It'll just be there, which is great, because then you can watch it if you missed it. Now the webcasts, I need suggestions on webcasts as much as I need suggestions on Videomail. Of course, the Videomail is user-driven. I look through the resource wish list forum that is in the forums for ideas on lectures, but also webcasts. Love to know what you guys would like to see me doing live. The ergonomics webcast was a huge hit. In June, Jason Farine and all his expertise brought the house down. It was great, and that's just, you know, the kind of webcast I want to bring to you guys. So please just let me know. Okay, great. So this week's question is, I really like it because it's a little bit of a change of pace. It's pretty technical, and so why don't you take a look? Wow, right? I said super technical, and I was not kidding. So here's the deal with things that are super technical. You need to know about what you can do that will break normal, either lighting setup, normal fur setup, muscle, cloth, and in this case, motion blur. Okay? You need to know these things. So I'm going to run through real quick the things that you need to know, and we'll settle on finally in the Maya demo on the question that was asked, and then we'll wrap up. So the first thing that you need to know is that normally you're not working with the renderable rig in features. In TV, a lot of times you are. A lot of times there's subdivisions set up so that when the character is rendered, everything will look exactly like it is supposed to. Okay, so just understanding that is good to know just as a base level. In features, however, when you have your animation level rig, so on Kong, for instance, we had a tin can rig. A lot of times what you'll have to do is you'll have to do a muscle bake, which is submit your animation scene to be picked up by a computer that is running a script that automatically takes the animation, copies it onto the rig that has the muscle deformations applied to it, runs the simulation, then bakes the geometry from that simulation back out and into your scene. So you can check it and see if anything's going wrong. Normally, where you get the most problems are in the joints. Of course, you're not really going to get pinching like in the middle of a big muscle. That would make very little sense. That's the entire reason that we build muscle systems, is so that the big muscles can move around and react off of each other nicely. Okay, so but you'll definitely get a lot of problems in the armpit. You'll get a lot of problems between the neck and the shoulder, especially with a character that was rigged in a relaxed T-pose like so, and is now doing motions like this. Okay, you'll get some in the crotch, you'll get some problems in the back of the knee, but nine times out of 10, you problems in the armpit, bringing it down, and in the shoulder, raising it up. Because where's all the skin really going to go? Okay, so it is advantageous for you when you're working on a film that has like a creature, and it is a muscular creature, and they're doing muscle simulation. You should work very closely with your sim guys or girls, and make sure you have a really good working relationship in terms of finding problems and squashing problems when they arrive. Okay. That being said, what we did on Kong and what you can do is you can actually create a piece of geometry that has an indicator for you when you're going a little bit too far. Okay, so I can show you how to do that. In fact, let me jump into that real quick. Okay. So what you can do is this. Here we have a simple setup. Okay, it is just a joint with a controller on it. I want to show you that even though there's a controller, a joint will always pick up the rotation values from basically world space or from its parent, and the parent is in world space. So we've got just a very simple rig, and then this object is parented to the joint. Okay, so let's say this is the arm of your character and you're bending it like this. All right, this sphere has been placed here to give us an indicator when you're working with your muscle guys or gals, how far you can bend it without like getting problems in the elbows, for instance. Okay, so rather than having to guess at all times, you do some tests, you work with them, and you create a pose, and they say like, okay, that's good, but then this is too far. Okay, so if this is good, we're going to set up a driven key to actually drive the attribute of the material of this object so that you can see what's going on. Okay, so it's very, very easy. We're going to create a new Lambert, and we're going to apply it to the sphere. We're going to make it 100%. Let's see here. Going to make the color, let's see, which one can we use? All right, incandescence. Yeah, there we go, incandescence. We're going to use the incandescence channel to drive this, okay? So right now it's good, so that's green, okay? We're going to set a driven key by selecting that controller and going Window, Animate, Set Driven Key, Set Key, okay? And then it automatically loads what you selected as the driven. I don't know why, but select it and load driver on that NURB circle. Then select this object, select the Lambert tab, and then hit select at the bottom of the attribute editor. That actually selects the shader, and not instead of selecting the sphere and just giving you access to the shader, which is the way the attribute editor works. And we like that it does that, but that won't help us. So we need to select it using the select button down there, and then hit load driven. Okay? So we're going to have the rotate Z attribute of the NURB circle drive the incandescence channels of that Lambert shader. And since it's green and this is what we want, then we hit key. All right, and then if you work out with your muscle guys like, oh, that's too far, then you would select this, go to that incandescence channel, change it to red, okay, and then just hit key. All right, so now what we've done is we've made it so that this channel drives the color of that incandescence, meaning, look, we have a basically perfect little indicator, like, nope, you can't pose it that far, back it out. Okay, so this is a great simple way that you can make it so that your rigs never have problems, and you can work with, you know, the people on your team instead of kind of against them, which is you know, common on a really big show, that you basically will end up butting heads sometimes with people who have jobs ahead of you or behind you. Okay, so we want to avoid that at all costs. In terms of cloth, I mentioned in a Videomail and a lecture that there's normally objects that are brought into your scene, and we start our animation on frame 1, but then the dynamics people will, and the cloth people will import your animation on frame 101 so that they have 100 frames of pre-roll. Maya Cloth and other cloth plugins now, they're fine with negative frames of pre-roll, but it's just a common practice. What you need to know about cloth is that you can't normally bring your hand or any limb so close that it would be crushing the cloth into the skin. So you just have to think that there's a little bit of a skin outside your character, and that's normally all you have to worry about. You can't cheat poses so much that it breaks the lighting setup. So if your character is acting like this and there's a dramatic light, like from here, and it's casting on a wall that's right behind them, like if your legs, if the character goes like this into screen and your legs are actually left behind, you know what I'm talking about, with those IK legs shooting out behind, and you can see that on the wall behind. Obviously that's a problem. You need to be always cognizant of where those shadows are going to be cast and how much you can get away with, because there's nothing worse than thinking you're done on a shot and then getting it back from the lighting team with the note, animate the legs. All right, it's such a pain in the butt, because you're like, oh, you worked so hard, you polished everything perfectly, the shot itself looks beautiful, the character comes in and they're there and they're everything, all the little fingertips, eye blinks, everything's beautiful, right? But then you have to go back in and add these legs to this performance. It's always such a downer to have to do that. Okay, so that's normally all you have to worry about with lighting. If you have a scene that has fluids or any other type of particles or effects or anything like that, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll bake the geometry on your character as well, so that all they're working with is baked geometry, so that they can run particles over it or something like that, so they don't have to go through all of that computation power just to get your character, in the rig all the way up to that point for every single frame. So they normally will bake it. So you don't normally have to worry too much about that if you have, successfully, not cheated too much where you're breaking the lighting, worried about the muscles if there are, cloth as well. Then dynamics are okay. The one exception is hair, in which you, if it's long hair, you need to know where it's going to be. So normally you'll check that as well. But again, the thing with hair is a lot like cloth, that if you have a character and you have them go like, gee, I don't know, then their hand went right through their hair, and it's probably a better idea for you to leave it just a little bit off. So if there are collisions, that it won't be, you aren't forcing it to get pressed into that skull geometry. The next thing is when you're subdividing, this is just like if you're doing your own little tests and stuff like that. Subdividing at render time works beautifully, works like magic in Mental Ray, because you can just hit 3 on that geometry. But the thing is that you need to worry about crease sets. You need to worry about the fact that if you have a hard edge, that it will be smoothed as well. And work with crease sets. I can give you guys a demo on that a little bit later, probably in a lecture. That seems a little bit more appropriate. But subdividing at render time does normally mean that there's going to be some hierarchy issues. I like to create a set for subdivision. So what that means is selecting all the objects that need to be subdivided and not selecting a group. So you normally don't grab a group like the geometry group and then just hit 3. Okay. Most of the time that will be, you'll be subdividing things that aren't supposed to be, and it's normally not a great idea to do that. Also, sometimes the rig has controllers that will be subdivided if you do that as well. And every once in a while, I know KK controllers, for instance, the controller plugin that I like to use to create my controllers, most if not all of those controls are not meant to be subdivided. So if you do, it'll change the shape of it and it'll look really weird. So that's another thing. But then the final thing, and the focus of this question was asking about motion blur. And what basically motion blur is that with film, your shutter is open for a certain amount of time to let enough light in to expose the film, and then the shutter closes. Now, the way that works is a mechanical process, and so there's always a little bit amount of time that goes by as the shutter is open, meaning it will catch movement in the frame, and therefore the objects will seem blurred. All right? Not a very hard concept to understand. In CG, however, there's no camera, so we have to simulate shutter movement. When you have motion blur, it adds a lot of realism, and I hate to say it, but sometimes when something's just not looking right, I add motion blur and just see, like, am I seeing something that's not there, or is this really looking a little bit wonky? We normally use 2D motion blur and we apply it in After Effects, and that is like the lowest fi method you could possibly do for motion blur. Our clients, for the kind of work that we do, and our clients' needs, and also, well, for instance, one of our shows is supposed to be like found footage. So it's like we have a piece of tape that is like somebody's memory, and it's like blurry, you know, to start with. The lighting is always like, it's always like dusk and really hard to see as well. So that 2D motion blur solution in After Effects works for us. The difference between 2D and 3D motion blur is that 2D motion blur basically takes the movement, it takes the frame before, like the render, the 2D render, and it blurs them together based on how far the pixels have moved. If you do 2D motion blur in Maya, it actually takes the pixels and knows what object that is. So it's a lot more accurate than just like a point and click or just like a drag and drop motion blur solution that you'd find in After Effects. Okay? So that's 2D motion blur. It's the 2D image, and Maya knows which objects are actually which objects, and so it takes that into consideration. 3D motion blur, it takes the actual vertices, and per pixel it blurs it, depending on the change in distance, the actual movement of that vertice or that point on the polygon. Per pixel, meaning if you have 2D motion blur and something is coming right at you, okay, and if it has a texture on it, okay, that is, like fiery or something like that, it will be blurred in 2D, but it won't be blurred in 3D. I'm sorry, other way around. A better example would be this: if you have a object that is basically moving, let's say it has a reflective texture instead. Here's a better example. A reflective texture, the objects you see in the reflection of that texture, if they're not moving, it won't be blurred in 3D, but it will be blurred in 2D. Why? Because this object is moving from here to here, and all the 2D motion blur plugin wants to know is where did it go in terms of the image. So 3D is a lot more accurate, but it's slower. Okay? So what you need to know is that there are things that we do as animators that screw this totally up, like the examples that were given in the question. One of the biggest examples that happens is definitely geometry visibility switches, where you have a piece of geometry right here, and then someone goes and picks it up, and you switch it. There's actually one that's hidden, and then you turn it on, and it's in his hand the whole time. The reason that looks weird is because that cup on the ground, it didn't have any motion on it, and the cup that's in his hand did. So it's like he's about to grab it, and then you do the visibility switch, and then you'll switch to, Maya thinks, an object that's been moving this entire time, and there'll be way more motion blur on it than there should be. It's not coming to a start, it's actually already in motion. Another thing that causes problems that was pointed out is FK-IK switches or constraints, switching constraints. And the reason that happens is because there is a microscopic amount of movement that happens instantaneously. One of the bugs, or sort of one of the weird ways that motion blur works, is that it takes into consideration the speed almost more than it takes anything else into consideration. So what does that mean? If you go 100 miles in 1 hour, you're going 100 miles an hour. But if you go 1 centimeter instantaneously, then you are traveling at the speed of light, right? So a lot of times what happens is across an instantaneous, especially if you key it from 0 to 1 or stepped mode across 1 frame, what will happen is even though you're going from like FK and to right here and you match the pose perfectly, then to IK, then what will happen is that just that any tiny little movement that you had, just a tiny little movement, is instantaneous, and it'll blur because it thinks that it moved incredibly fast, and technically it did. All right, so there's only one way and only one renderer that takes this into consideration. If you aren't going to use this, then the only way to fix it is to use a third-party plugin, or do it in After Effects like we do, and you can render a motion vector, but you'll have the same problem with the subframes. All right, so let me just show you real quick everything I just talked about. So we have a sphere, and it moves across, and then it has a little bit of basically deformation on it, okay? What you can see is that on this frame, between frame 5 and 6, it wigs out, okay? And if I actually just hit the comma key, you'll see that from frame 5, it goes to here, and then it goes back, and then it just keeps on going, okay? So if we render this on frame 5, sorry, giving away everything here, with Maya software, all right, with motion blur turned off, it looks like this. There it is, frame 5, okay? Now let me just keep this image. Frame 6 looks like this, all right? So 5, 6, 5, 6, 5, 6. If we turn on motion blur, let's just do 2D first, okay? Then we'll see that we render frame 5, it freaks out. And renders frame 6, it's continuously freaking out. But on frame 7, since it's only blurring by 1 frame, it's back to normal because it's blending frame 6 with frame 7. So the way to fix this, and this is only with Maya software, okay? And this happens with 2D and 3D. If I go 3D, well, first of all, it composites it better. The 2D motion blur actually blurs the alpha edge, so you have to composite it later. But anyway, so on our 3D, it's also screwed up, okay? This happens with both renderers, okay? Or sorry, with both motion blur types. The only way to fix this is to use the shutter open close attribute and set it to -1 and then 1. Now what this does is that it kind of changes your motion blur to a different result, a slightly different result, but what it does is it makes it so that the open time is a frame before on an integer frame, and the close time is a frame after, all right? So it doesn't take into consideration this non-integer freakout nearly as much. If I hide this background object that I put in there just to show you, kind of what's going on, you'll see that there's no, aberration in that alpha. On 2D, same thing, but 2D is composited slightly differently, and you get a different alpha edge there. Okay, so let me turn that off again, and you'll see one more time that the what am I looking for? There it is. All right, so motion blur. Let's go 3D. Oh wait, no, I said 2D, right? All right. So where is it? Oh, see, we're on frame 5, and everything's freaking out. That's why. Okay. So 2D didn't even render anything because it basically thought the object was completely gone. It just thinks it's totally gone. Okay. So so you need to use the shutter open close to fix this. Now what they'll do a lot of times in production to fix this is they'll bake the geometry so that the that little IKFK switch that you did is a little bit of a flip out just in the geometry kind of itself, and then they'll manage the deformations. See, if you look here, this is deformed. This is deformation motion blur. Okay, so let me go to 3D because it always looks nicer with deforms. Okay, so that's the deformation. See, it's like shooting out and coming back, right? Okay, so that deform looks fine. If I turn off shutter, open and close, you can actually change. You can actually manage the amount of blur on a deform more with shutter open close, I find, than any other method. So that's what they'll do. The way you fix this yourself is you do this on all of your. Oops, lost my window. The way you fix this yourself is you do this on all of your transitions, whether it's an FK head to IK head, if it's a head follow to like head snap to torso or hips or whatever, if it's a switch from FK to IK arms, if you're turning on and off a constraint, you might want to just consider doing it over a few more frames. Or one way to fix the FK IK switching is animate it forward like in IK, switch to FK, okay, so that transition point looks good, and then animate a few frames backwards in FK so that there's a little bit of motion on that on the lead up to that switch as well, and then switch back to IK and animate a little bit of follow through. So you're not using those frames, but at least behind the scenes the joints are moving and they're kind of blending into each other. And normally if you do that, even if you have a one frame switch, the fact that the controller is moving the geometry through that switch normally takes care of all of it. Normally. But I think you'll find that using the shutter open close fixes that motion blur problem. So let's recap real quick. You need to know about lighting, causing lighting errors, causing fur errors and hair errors by having pinching geometry, as well as in the muscle systems. Cloth, you need to know that there's sort of like a haze, a fog around the character, and you can't do too much close work. And last but not least, the motion blur means that you need to know that you're actually in control of the speed of the objects, and that's what's taken into consideration for motion blurring. And those FK-IK switches, or any time you're switching anything, just realize that even if it moves, just a micron, if it does it instantaneously, technically it's like the speed of light. Okay? Technically it is. All right? So you need to just basically smooth those out. In fact, I can't remember what it is, but there's one of the fastest things in the world, if I'm not mistaken, is like this spore, or it's like, I can't remember what it is, but it's like this, it's like a living thing that shoots out, like, I don't know, seeds or something like that, and it shoots them out like insanely fast, like 100,000 miles an hour, let's just say that. But it's on a microscopic scale, so they travel like one millionth of a centimeter, but it's so fast that it's like the fastest thing on Earth, fastest chemical reaction or maybe biological thing like on Earth, something like that. I know I'm screwing it up, but it's something like that. So just remember that. Remember that tiny little spore that's shooting something like at the speed of light, but like one millionth of a centimeter when you're doing your FK-IK switches, and it won't seem so confusing that it's screwing up your motion blur if you smooth it out a little bit. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you for that great question. Please send in more questions. The address to send them to is webmaster@kennyroy.com. I go through all the questions and I answer the ones I think will help the most people. Please send one in if you haven't already. Hope you're enjoying the site. Look out for those awesome announcements that are coming up very soon to get involved with Little Painter and also to see the webcast. There's more coming up. I'm very excited to show it to you. Please, good luck with your animation, and as always, rock on.